Hi, everyone. Welcome to the GoldFish Report. I'm your host, Louisa. Today is Monday, December 2nd, 2019. This is our 410th GoldFish Report. It's week 149 in review. It's always the previous week. It's actually the 150th week for the president this week. Doing our 149th POTUS report with the most dangerous mind in America, my colleague and my co-host, my buddy, Jim Fetzer. How are you, Jim?
Hey, Louisa, I hope you had a great Thanksgiving. The latest absurdity on the Democratic side is the entry of Michael Bloomberg. How could anyone think that an old, rich, white billionaire from New York City could defeat an old, white, rich billionaire from New York City? I mean, it's ridiculous. It's going to fraction the Democratic Party. The progressives are going to oppose him with all their might. And it's going to be one more ingredient in the landslide re-election for Donald Trump in 2020.
Jim, I agree with you. Let me just first ask, did you have a nice Thanksgiving, my friend?
Terrific, terrific.
Wonderful,
terrific.
wonderful. And mine was quite awesome. So there we have it. And I hope everybody enjoyed a nice, safe Thanksgiving. And on the topic of Thanksgiving, we know that the president, I'm going to screen share, had visited Afghanistan. It was a surprise visit. I'm going to screen share this for Thanksgiving. Here's the pictures on Thanksgiving Day. Took a trip to Afghanistan. Here's the president arriving in the Air Force Base there. Wow, that's just an awesome picture. Here's another photo of the president. I mean, he does not disappoint, this man. He's at Bagram Airfield. This was on November 28th. So this was a few photos by the White House. Here he is serving meals. I mean, what an incredible commander-in-chief doing what he's doing, commander-in-chief, Jim. I mean, a wonderful, wonderful show of solidarity with the troops, and also a show of respect and for their service, because you know, of course, we know that the president is military trained as well. Here he is sitting down eating with some of the soldiers, and look at that, he's having his own meal with them and then taking photos afterwards. I think these people were very happy, very pleasantly surprised that their commander-in-chief came to visit them on the, a very important day, of course. Here we have the president with military leaders and the White House staff, meets with the president of Afghanistan at the Bagram Airfield in Afghanistan as well. So they did have some important talks they needed to have, and here's the president delivering remarks to service members. And here's a bigger picture. Boy, were they very happy to see him. Check this out. Look at this, folks. Very happy to see their commander-in-chief, and who wouldn't be? You know, this is what it's like at a Trump rally, and we'll be finding out pretty soon, since we're going to be covering the one in Hershey, Pennsylvania. So we will be there, God willing. So here's look how happy these servicemen are. Very happy and prideful that their president is there. And here's the president, obviously always comfortable, Jim. Notice how comfortable he is around servicemen. He's so comfortable around our military, you know, where other, members, other presidents were not comfortable. They were not comfortable in their own skin, should I say. So here he is. Okay, some more pictures of this. And this is a really wonderful picture of them all gathering and spending time together on Thanksgiving. So this is where the president chose to be. It was unannounced. And of course we had, oh my gosh, Jim, here's some more pictures. I'm just going to scroll through really quick. Jim, I just wanted to ask your opinion about this, what you thought about how Newsweek had, I'm sure you heard that Newsweek had reported that the president was out golfing and such on Thanksgiving, and then they had to retract that, and then they fired the reporter who published that. What do you think of that, Jim?
Well, Trump's the master of the media, Louisa. He's not only demonstrated brilliance in calling out the fake news, which was exactly spot on to make the American public realize that they're being constantly lied to by the mainstream media. But here he pulled the rug out from under their feet. I mean, it was a perfect demonstration of Trump's mastery of marketing, of public relations, of reaching the American people with a message that makes it impossible not to understand.
Well, and that's a very good point that you make, Jim, because we're going to talk a little bit about Q because, again, we are the news, and that's what's happening here. I wanted to screen share this other, so let's move along. Here we have the president today flying to London to the UK for a, what is this?
NATO?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm just trying to read my notes here. NATO Leaders Summit. Sorry, folks. So here was a little background press call regarding that. And of course, they're a little bit concerned. They're very concerned about China right now because China seems to want to, well, let's just look at what they're saying about this. China, there are continuing challenges that NATO need to face. China, above all, China is actively seeking a great presence and more influence across the globe, including in NATO's area of responsibility. It is offering cheap money, cheap investment, and critical infrastructure, including ports and electricity grids. It is seeking to trap nations in debt and thus bring diplomatic concessions that way. And it is looking to undermine the rules-based international order and skirting in some cases. This is true. I've spoken to some people down in Australia as well, and this is all, very big news in Australia, actually, what's going on with all this Chinese development. It's like, really, the Chinese, this is a very, is this an imperialistic move to, conquer the world here, coming in there with their cheap money and infrastructure development? I don't know. But according to this phone call, there's, lots of concern about that. Here they're going to talk about 5G, which is very controversial right now in terms of the safety of 5G and what the
I guarantee you it's a killer. It's
yeah,
absolutely disastrous. And
yeah.
I have this from multiple highly reliable sources and from boots on the ground, including firemen who had one of these towers put up right near the firehouse and immediately began experiencing nausea, headaches, all kinds of problems that were rather acute until they moved it. The idea of endorsing 5G is an absurdity. I'm worried that this is the mechanism they're going to use as a primary depopulation for the United States. And Deagle, this very bizarre website with connections to intel agencies and the military industrial complex, projects for 2025 population reductions in the United States from about 330 million to 100 million, Louisa. That's absolutely staggering. That's on the order of 50 million per year for the next 5 years. How could it possibly happen? 5G, I believe, is the answer.
Jim, you might be right, and this is definitely part of the from the research that I've come across. It's definitely in the agenda of the elites of the deep state military industrial complex, which is global, folks. It isn't just within the United States. So we need to hold them accountable. We know too that there's been schools, Jim, where children have been there was like a clusters of cancer next to these towers, these 5G towers. So folks, we need to take responsibility, stop burying our heads in the sand. And it's so funny because I tried to warn this one friend of mine, not to get vaccinations when she had a baby, and now, it looks like her son has autism, and it's a shame. But I tried to warn her; she didn't believe it, and now she's got to, deal with that. So anyway,
that's so tragic, Louisa.
Well, that's the problem. A lot of people don't believe when, they don't want to be these outliers. They don't want to be the black sheep. They want to go along with what everybody else goes along with instead of really sticking to their own. If you don't have the facts about it, that's fine. But if you feel like, if you feel like your discernment's telling you something's not right, then something probably isn't right. And you really should go with that, regardless of what, trying to make people around you happy or trying to fit in with the crowd, because it's going to just keep hurting everybody. Let me keep going. We're having this NATO where on Tuesday, the president is having a working breakfast with NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg, and they will have bilateral meetings with the president of France, and of course, hosted by the Queen. Uh, so there's going to be a lot of things that they're going to talk about there. They're also going to have a bilateral meeting with Angela Merkel, and also the other nations of Estonia, Greece, Latvia, Poland. So you can see here, these are all NATO members. So this is what's going on over in London these days. And I wanted to just share the first question really quick because it was a really good one. And it said, this is Christina Anderson from AWPS News. Last week, the NATO ministers voted to declare space another domain, along with the other standard domains of air, land, sea, and cyber. Will there be discussions about space as a domain and the framework to promote cooperation between the NATO allies going forward? And will this take place at the leaders' meeting also? And the senior administration official said, no, I think this is really interesting and excellent and exciting point. As you know, the president has stressed space as a domain in his administration. NATO's adaptation of it is one more example of NATO addressing new challenges. We have already been discussing with our allies how this works, how this looks, some of the conceptual issues, and I expect, yes, I expect that it will come up during the Leaders Summit. You know, what we have to remember, folks, is that this should benefit all of humanity, not just the elites. I would think that, you know, the human beings, the people who the residents of this planet should have a say in these conversations, because when you just leave this up to people who, let's see, they've proven track record of you know, debt slavery, of depopulation, of, you know, they don't have our best interest at heart. I have to tell you, that's my opinion from my research, that we have to start holding them accountable. But folks, if you want, you know, in terms of President Trump, I think he is trying to make positive changes that include everybody, not just the elites for their own little small group of people. Let's hope that he can bring about these benefits to everybody. Now, let's move along to some more news. A wonderful and most amazing, oh, it just looks so incredible. Let me screen share this. The White House has announced that the First Lady has unveiled Christmas at the White House. It is absolutely beautiful. And this year's theme is the spirit of America, which is wonderful. The decorations look wonderful. No, I have not been back to the White House. Sadly, we haven't had funding for it. I would have loved to have been there to take pictures, but you know, that will be in our future. Here, the Gold Star family tree and all kinds of beautiful things. And I'm going to just skip ahead for you so that you
I was
can
going to
look
say,
at
I hope you
this.
have a photograph and
Yeah,
viewing
let's,
of the First Lady, who's so
of course.
sensational.
She's amazing. And look at this beautiful, beautiful tree. It's, you know, she has a lot of the drum ornamentation, not necessarily ornaments, but I mean, like, you know, here, this is like standing on a drum as if
Yep,
it's
very impressive.
coming out of a drum, you know, a snare drum or something. And so that's beautiful. That's in the East Wing. Here we have, this is beautiful as well. The East Colonnade of the White House is decorated for Christmas season. Here we have this looking like a little Iceland here. And then right down the hallway is that beautiful tree. So it's very light. You know, the stars, there's lots of stars hanging. So it's all about light. And I think it's a very appropriate message to be sending, that you know, that light is being restored. You know, it's light is being restored in the White House. That's the way I look at it. Here we have another beautiful, interesting. This is again in the East Colonnade, and this is like a clear uh, picture of, it looks like Seattle. There's the Space Needle and things like that there. I'm not quite sure what the details are we're looking at, but I think there's a new proposed skyscraper, and I think it's comparing the Space Needle to the height of that, but it's not that descriptive in the photo. Here's some beautiful roses, beautiful decoration that looks very, very nice. I would just keep going. A small little version of that on the table. Uh, beautiful, beautiful little. Oh, there's military there. Are they Chinook or are they Black Hawk helicopters? They're helicopter ornaments. Look at that on the tree, on a smaller tree again, coming out of a drum. So a drummer boy timing rhythm. Oh, that's interesting messages, isn't it? Because it's time, according to Q, for some really interesting things to be moving along. And here we have this beautiful, you know, plentiful table, beautifully decorated in the dining room there. Very beautiful. Uh, it's another close-up picture. That's the Thanksgiving decorations. Very, very nice. And she has a really exquisite taste. She is in these photos. Let's move ahead. Oh, look at that. The spirit of America. That's really beautiful. She's done a great job. It's very beautiful. There again, the light and the star above this reflecting the chandelier in the mirror, which is very pretty. I'm sure they designed it that way. Look at all the stars, though. Stars, it's kind of bringing in that whole space force, that whole space element when you include all the stars and everything. But you have stars and stripes because that's what's on our American flag. And here they are again. You have some ribbon with stars on it, red, white, and blue. So it's about stars. It's about drummer boy, you know, the bugle, the military musicians who were recently honored at the White House. And here's an ornament, it looks like, the decoration. And so we move along. Beautiful, beautiful decorations, folks. You can go into
Most
detail.
most of these photographs, though, would be more interesting if they had the president or the first lady in them.
Yeah, well, they're coming up. And here's an interesting confidence and Kurt. Look at what this is. So this is in the red room, and this is it looks like, is it a gift or is it an under the tree? Oh, it's a box that the tree is standing in, and it's a Scrabble board. And look what's on there. Okay, caring, inspire, strong, love, uh, heroic. And this is about our military, of course. I think this is really them honoring our military. Very strong military feel in all of this. Be best. You can see she has her Scrabble pieces. That's cute because they're using Scrabble as part of the theme for this, which is an interesting game. I'll tell you, more wars have been waged over that game, Jim, of Scrabble than you can imagine. You know, all of a sudden the linguistics, you know, it's like a reinvention of the of what a word is when you're playing Scrabble. I know in my family it gets very interesting and very, very long game when everybody's got their own dictionary sitting next to them to prove that's a word. It's a fun, fun game. So here we go. Be best. Our dominoes as well. So it's very fun. I mean, it's, you know, using elements of games because that's what you do with family around the holidays, right? Sit around and play games until somebody cheats and someone gets mad and they get up and leave or a fight starts. So anyway, moving along, and this is a beautiful themed table with are these ice decoration? I don't think so. It looks like a cake actually, but look, all the icons of America here on the table. So that's really
It's a
beautiful.
gingerbread house.
Is it gingerbread? Yes,
Mm-hmm.
it is a gingerbread. It does say that. Yes, it does. It's white, but I guess that's the icing on it. So look at that. It's very beautiful. And here's our beautiful, gracious First Lady walking through the, you know, giving her final approval, I suppose, on the on the decorations and just how beautiful that is. I'd love to be there photographing this. Actually, it would be really beautiful. So let's just keep moving along because what we have to look. I'm going to show uh, screen share a few things. I'm going to have to unplug my headset and then I'll plug. Let's do this real quick. Can you still hear me okay, Jim?
Yes.
Okay, it's a little bit different, but I want the viewers to be able to hear this as good as they can, and then we'll move along with some other news. So here's our Twitter page, folks, and you're just not going to believe this. I don't know if you've seen this, but this is Joe Biden, you know, trying to talk to a bunch of people about. Well, you'll hear it for yourself.
And I'd love. And by the way, you know, I sit on the stand, and it get hot. I got hairy legs that turn turn blonde in the sun. And the kids used to come up and reach in the pool and rub my leg down so it was straight, and then watch the hair come back up again. They'd look at it. So I learned about roaches. I learned about kids jumping on my lap. And I love kids jumping on my lap. And I tell you what.
We know all about how you love kids jumping.
It's bizarre, Louise. It's like his subconscious is speaking, that he's aware he has these things to suppress and can't help talking about them.
Unbelievable. It is like his subconscious is like just not controllable. Here's the outside of the White House on AIDS Day. They were honoring AIDS victims, and this was really a beautiful expression of that, you know, at the White House there. And so let me just play this. I wanted you to realize what's been going on, the duplicity and the hypocrisy of the fake news. Here you have an example, and so QAnon wants everybody to start doing this if you can, okay, and publishing this. Here you have July 2016. You have, this is the 28th. No, here, let's go to the 19th of 2016. So Melania Trump's RNC fashion, a scary statement. Here they're criticizing her for wearing white. And yet you have Hillary Clinton wearing white just a week later. And you know how presidential she looked in all white pants.
It's just absurd, the hypocrisy, and it's the same author in the same publication, just a disgrace.
Exactly. And there's so many of these examples. I wanted to share more of them with you.
Yes.
Because I wanted you to realize just how many there are. And we have this guy actually who, okay, so this is the guy that Q has posted his Twitter link. And do you know how many times I've had to follow this guy, and he gets, like, randomly people are unfollowed. So here we have one of these, and then here's also pictures of the president. You can take a look at the Twitter feed to see those. They want to eradicate AIDS in 10 years, which is a great goal to achieve. Here's another beautiful picture of Melania Trump, our beautiful FLOTUS. There's more of these pictures. Barron, what a big boy he's getting to be. I mean, this kid is growing. There's a different picture. If I see it, I'll show it to you. But the three of them walking, and he's at least 6 inches taller than Trump. I mean, easily. Here's Melania again at the White House, and here's the two of them boarding Air Force One. And the Christmas tree is a Douglas fir. It's a little more than 5 meters tall. It's 16 years old, and it's displayed in the Blue Room. And here's a video. Let me just play this real quick of the White House video. Very nice, very, very nice. So yes, we probably should have played that first and forgot about the still pictures, but that's okay. We have, okay, be aware, folks, you know that on the 9th that it's scheduled that the Horowitz report is scheduled to be released on the 9th. The whole FISA, unlawful FISA charade. There are advertisements here for role players for, here it is, for, yeah, they already started, it looks like, for crisis actors in the Austin, Texas area for December 3rd through the 7th, folks. $600 right before Christmas. Who can turn that down, Jim? To betray our country, who could turn that down? I hope people turn it down. I hope you don't participate in this, in these false flags, because they're hurting America. So here's the warning: get ready, stay vigilant, be safe. There's definitely, a false flag warning out there right now. Also, it looks like it already started. There was a shooting in the French Quarter, New Orleans. So it looks like it's already starting. They're concerned, here's Human Domain Solutions. We know this company, Jim, unfortunately, don't we?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, more pictures of the beautiful White House. Go here to look. This is also going to just show you this, because this is very important. This is regarding what's happening right now on the mainstream media. We have 60 Minutes doing a segment with Susan Wojcicki of YouTube, and I want you to listen to what they're doing with regards
Jiski
to
says they have, she told us that earlier this year, YouTube started reprogramming its algorithms in the US to recommend questionable videos much less and point users who search for that kind of material to authoritative sources like news clips. With these changes, Wojcicki says they have cut down the amount of time Americans watch controversial content by 70%. She told us that earlier this year, YouTube started reprogramming its algorithms in the US to recommend questionable videos much less and point users who search for that kind of material to authoritative sources like news clips. With these changes, Wojcicki says they have cut down the amount of time Americans watch controversial content by 70%. She told us that earlier this year, YouTube started reprogramming.
So this is what's going on. This is now this is now, you know, the fake news. You know, now we have social media that's becoming an arm of a propaganda arm of the DNC. It looks like, Jim, and we all knew this, but now look, they're admitting to it. They're admitting to how they're doing this. I'm going to stop screen sharing here and go over to Q for a moment to close up on the stories, because here we have Q talking about just this topic, Jim. As we pointed out last week, remember our last POTUS report, where we had the video of, you know, all the different news organizations reading from a script. This is what's happening. You have here all of these mainstream publications talking about Q, talking about, you know, that it's a conspiracy theory, that you know, they're had to be deleted. What other headlines are here? I mean, they're really trying to control the narrative, which is really what they're trying to do. But they can't do that because the spirit of the people aren't going to allow that to happen. And then here we also have, hold on a second. Here we also have, I have to go back into the queue. Here we go. We have a little bit more on the Q posts. These are all new posts. What we have here is, look at this in Iran, okay? Restart loves pound Q, thanks Q. Restart, we'll make Iran great again. QAnon, restart opposition. So all over the world, people get what's going on with this movement. They get that this is, you know, this is the positive, you know, military behind Trump, who's trying to change the world for the better. And you know, it's everywhere. I mean, here's another photo of, can you see this one, Jim? This is in Hong Kong. Great Awakening. Can you see this photo of Hong Kong? Yeah. So it's everywhere, all over the world, folks. But what Q's talking about in these posts is how this is really the news is completely bought out, completely sold out to. I mean, there's Susan Wojcicki from YouTube, who's, you know, controlling the flow of information, controlling who gets to see what videos. You know, if that's not fascism, I don't know what is, Jim. You know, that's total manipulation of the information we receive. We are not going to hear it all the time on YouTube. You literally have to go and find the channels that talk about Q and go to them directly, because searching them in the search results just isn't going to work. But there's a lot of other things going on, Jim. So look, I wanted our viewers to know what was going on with the president, why he's in London this week. I hope, again, everybody had a nice Thanksgiving. We are, you know, in the holiday season time, so I hope everyone stays safe, be vigilant, and keep your eyes out for anything that's unusual, folks, because when that report comes out, it's going to be explosive. And what do we always know that they do, Jim? When there's bad news against them coming out, they always pull off some kind of
stage a distraction. Yeah,
absolutely, Jim. So I hand it over to you, my friend.
Well, there's a nice convergence here, because my very first story, Louisa, is about the manipulation of YouTube. They're using a protection of children law passed in 2000 to censor the internet, where YouTube plus COPA, this is the new legislation, really means game is over. We've wondered how the deep state would cope with the internet, where videos made by its critics and exposés of orchestrated events like JFK and 9/11 and staged events like Sandy Hook and the Boston bombing have made a profound impact upon the American people, who have gradually awakened to the realization that Donald Trump has been right. The mainstream media are masters at propagating fake news, even going so far as to create fake fact checkers who can certify false claims as true on behalf of the rich and powerful. This is the legislative act. It's called the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. It sounds innocuous on its face, but the way it's being implemented is going to be devastating. It now appears that a heretofore obscure legislation known as COPA, Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, is being deployed to alter the internet as we have known it, especially by requiring the designation of all YouTube videos to be declared to be made for kids or not made for kids, where the chimera of protecting the interests of children will serve as a pretext for fining creators up to $42,000 per video in violation of these new standards, where channels that are not deemed to be commercially viable will also be pruned. It looks as though if you don't have a channel that's bringing in six figures, that you're going to be wiped out, which of course is true for virtually every internet truth-seeking effort here, which are not financially remunerative. Here's a representative of the Federal Trade Commission, one commentator a second. It looks as though what they're reporting is completely accurate. The effect will be to drive truth seekers out of YouTube and create a family-friendly platform for programming for children. Cynically, it appears this move will also afford protection for pedophiles by creating a haven for focusing on children and precluding exposés of Pedogate, the American franchise of which is known as Pizzagate, where I have done enough to research to confirm its reality. New York City Gold Shield detective Jim Rothstein, an expert on these cases, told me that on the basis of his experience, 70% of the US political elite are pedophiles. It appears to be an effective method of suppressing videos that expose corruption and criminality, including child abuse and sexual exploitation on behalf of the rich and powerful. As we know from a Princeton sociological study, the US proclaims itself to be a democracy, but in practice is nothing more than an oligarchy, where this move to protect the political elite from exposure on multiple diverse grounds looks like a winner in neutralizing YouTube as a forum for discussion and debate. The alternative has to be to move to other platforms. I have interviewed Jason Boss, who founded 153news.net, which has been a bastion of support for freedom of speech, freedom of the press, which is indispensable to a viable democracy. Given the deep state lies to us all the time, we have to have the ability to sort out the true from the false, typically by testing official narratives to see if they are vulnerable to falsification. The creation of false narratives and fabricated evidence makes that a challenge. But without the opportunity to interact and engage in mutual criticism, it becomes virtually impossible. I therefore urge each and every one to consider lending to support to 153news.net. I regard this matter as of even more importance than my own court case, which demonstrates beyond any reasonable doubt that the power of the courts and the American legal system is biased and warped to protect the interests of the rich and powerful. Many of my videos about Sandy Hook and other false flags attacks are archived at 153news.net. Jason needs to raise $1,000 a month to keep it going. We must all support 153news.net for the sake of our future. Louisa, I interviewed Jason last night on my show, and it turns out they have over 40,000 videos that are very hard-hitting and exposés. And I suggested to Jason that instead of having to depend on donations, which leaves things uncertain from month to month, that instead he have an archiving fee of $1 per video per year, $1 per video per year, which would bring in, for the 40,000 he already has, 40,000 a year, far in excess of the 12,000 he needs minimally to maintain the servers. But where I suggest he create a legal defense fund with a surplus to support court cases that involve freedom of speech, freedom of the press, First Amendment issues such as the James Tracy case with Florida Atlantic, the Wolfgang Halbig case in Florida, and my own case here in Dane County, Wisconsin. he seemed highly receptive to the issue, and that particular video interview should be up on the internet today.
Well, that's interesting, Jim, you know, because, you know, I have my own First Amendment lawsuit going, as you know, and it is in federal court, actually, because it has been 8 years. Who can drag somebody through the court through litigation for 8 years? Only the deep state. So, you know, if you want to go to a town hall meeting, if you want to go to some kind of political event where it's a public forum and you ask for redress of grievance, you can plan on being targeted by the court if you say something they don't like. This is exactly what they did to me. This is exactly the fight I've been in for 8 years. You know, it's unbelievable, Jim. It's unbelievable, but you're absolutely right. They're there to protect their own interests. You know,
Yeah, this is a destruction of YouTube as a forum for the public, and it appears to me to be completely violative of the legislation that originally allowed the use of the airwaves by these private companies, Google, YouTube, Facebook, and so forth. And eventually, I would expect a remedy to occur through the legislative process. However, the problem is the damage that takes place in the meanwhile, in the years before slow-moving legislative proposals are acted upon. And, you know, it means really they're implementing these beginning on the 10th of December, Louisa. So
oh, isn't that a coincidence?
By the 1st of January, YouTube is dead. So I say there should be a mass migration to 153news.net, to BitChute. Those, I think, are the two sites I would recommend most highly. I know Jason Voss. He's an upright, righteous dude who stands for freedom from censorship. He is a very, very fine man, and I support him 100%.
Well, that's good news, Jim. You know, we all want freedom from censorship, but as long as it's a private company, you know, that's how it is. I mean, like PBS is a public broadcast system, right? But so they had more public interest. It has to be owned by the public. That's what has to happen. You can't have private corporations running we can't trust them. We can't have private corporations running our communications networks. They want it, but we don't. So we want to, you know, the information to travel. So we have to have it public. That's the only thing. That's the only way to solve this, is that the public owns it, Jim, because then you can get the you know, that caveat that it's a private company and they can do whatever they want. You know, they could restrict your speech however they want because it's a private company. So we have to, that's what my hope of GoldFish Report has always been. It's always been for the people. And much to, you know, my detriment, of the attacks, the threats, the you know, censorship of the media, the deleting of my channel, the deleting of my blogs. I mean, you know, but we have to start somewhere.
Very good, Louisa. Very good. So I encourage you to check it out. Go to 153news.net. On the home page, you'll find ways you could donate. But I do believe this new policy I've recommended to Jason of $1 per video per year is going to work. Meanwhile, the Democrats' worst nightmare poll show 34% of black likely voters approve of Donald Trump. Here's a Dr. Ewan article about it. This is going to make the Democrats' heads explode, no doubt. While a Morning Consultant political poll reported only 18% of black registered voters approved of Trump's reform, two recent polls show that at least 34% of black voters approve of President Trump. A November 17 to 20 Emerson poll showed black approval of Trump at 34.5. A Rasmussen poll of likely voters showed 34% of black voters approving of Trump. This is very significant. The Democrats cannot possibly win if this kind of support comes from the black community. According to Breitbart, an increase in black support led to Trump's campaign decision to launch a Black Voices for Trump political coalition in a November 8th speech. Launching the coalition before black supporters in Atlanta, Georgia, President Trump said, "We're going to campaign for every last African-American vote in 2020. Among the black supporters our HUD Secretary, Dr. Ben Carson, newly elected Kentucky Attorney General Daniel Cameron, Pastor Darrell Scott Diamond, and Harrison Floyd. Citing Trump's history of staying up for Black Americans, Dr. Carson dismissed Trump's critics who called him a racist. He reminded the crowd that Jesse Jackson awarded Trump for his contribution to the Black community and opening up his club at Mar-a-Lago to Jews and Blacks, and that Trump dramatically increased funding for historically Black colleges and created tax-free opportunity zones for struggling urban communities. Carson quipped, let me tell you something, if he's a racist, he's an awfully bad one. He needs to get a lesson from the real racists. Indeed, in 1986, Trump received the Ellis Island Award for patriotism, tolerance, brotherhood, and diversity in the company of none other than Rosa Parks and Muhammad Ali. That's elite company to be in. Trump said the Democrats had taken the Black vote for granted and urged Blacks to wake up to the Democratic Party's record of suffering and neglect. He pointed out 58% of murder victims under 22 are Black, but the Democrats have failed to reduce crime, opened up the southern borders to crime and drugs, and that the 20 most dangerous cities in America are run by Democrats. I do think the open borders is a special importance to Blacks because they're bringing in lower wage workers who will undermine the gains the Blacks have made. So I believe this is going to stand up and be a reliable turn in the political preferences. Recall in the 2008 presidential election, 96% of African Americans voted for Obama. But during his presidency, the jobless rate reached its highest level since '84 at 16.7% in August of 2011. Black men had it the worst with joblessness at a staggering 19.1. Black unemployment has tumbled to a low of 5.5 in August of 2019. Rob Smith, a Black openly gay Iraq war veteran and conservative Republican, wrote at Fox News, Black unemployment is at an historic low in Detroit. The unemployment rate is so low, employers are taking a softer stance toward hiring ex-convicts than they have in the past. I think Democrats use identity politics to keep people in line. Smith said he wishes the Democratic Party, which claims to be champion of minorities, would spend as much time helping the Black community as they do attacking Trump. In 2016, Trump got 8%, or 1.2 million of Black voters. Imagine what 2020 would be like if 34% of Blacks voted for Trump. And that's 3/8 or 4/8 or 32. It would be like around 5 million Black votes for Trump under those circumstances. I think that's a huge development, and that Trump has earned the support for the Blacks and that the Democrats deserve to be abandoned.
Jim, you're right. And I don't see any way that Michael Bloomberg is going to even come close to comparing to Donald Trump, even though he did run, New York City as the mayor there. I think he's going to be seen as very disingenuous. There was even a quote, I haven't verified this, I didn't see him say this myself, but I did see this reported, that he had made a quote about regarding the poor people, about not making sure they don't have too much money so they can't hurt themselves. So you know what? This is unverified, but I did see it on a reliable source and a reliable report that I read. It's more of this elitist mentality, Jim. But you're right. Donald Trump he has always been from New York. He has always been very inclusive, and he doesn't even have the vibration. He doesn't even have the aura of being racist whatsoever. He came from New York City. You can't be racist. I mean, it's just ridiculous to even suggest this, and anybody who knows this. But, they'll try to spin the narrative. I don't think he has any problem winning, Jim. I think it's going to be a landslide.
I think you got that right, Louisa, and we're seeing another major reason why. Meanwhile, a Harris poll, Democrats' interest in impeachment has been dropping. Interest in the ongoing impeachment inquiry into President Trump appears to have started dropping, particularly among Democrats, after public testimony began. The Hill-Harris-X poll released by The Hill shows numbers of Democratic voters paying attention to the inquiry dropped by 5% to 73 in the latest survey. The numbers of other voters are dropping as well. 59% of independents say they're paying close attention. 64% of Republicans are paying attention. 65 overall say they're following the proceedings after remaining steady at 70 in previous polls. Latest survey was taken after State Department officials William Taylor and George Kent kicked off the first public hearings. But remember, they were asked whether there was anything about that phone call that warranted impeachment. What was the impeachable offense? And the silence that followed spoke volumes. Meanwhile, Representative Reed, on Monday's broadcast of Fox Network's Varney and Company, Representative Tom Reed of New York stated he doesn't see any Republicans in the House moving toward supporting impeachment, but he does see Democratic members who are coming up potentially against impeachment in private conversations. This is very significant. Even more stunning, a new Marquette Law School poll finds shifts in Wisconsin public opinion favorable to Trump and in terms of presidential election preferences. This is fascinating, Louisa. This is a highly reliable poll here in Wisconsin where I reside. Even as hearings that could lead to Trump's impeachment heat up, a new Marquette Law School poll, Wisconsin registered voters find consistent, if sometimes modest, shifts in public opinion away from support for impeachment and toward supporting Trump in the next election. He now holds small leads over each of the four top Democratic candidates for president in head-to-head matchups, whereas three of them held small leads over him prior to the impeachment inquiry. While the shifts are not large, they are consistent across multiple. Look here at the lineups. Right now, Trump leads Biden 47-44, Sanders 48-45, Warren 48-43, Buttigieg 47-39. Very significant. Not only that, but there are a lot of Democrats in red states that were carried by Trump are going to run the risk of losing their seats if they support impeachment. I think this is going to be very, very significant, Louisa, that they're in trouble, very deep trouble.
Yeah, clean up. I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. No, I was advised you come. Go.
No, I mean, drain that swamp, baby. You know what I mean? Drain that swamp. I mean, let them do it. They're, like I said, what did I tweet yesterday? I tweeted that this is Shakespeare, this whole impeachment theater, Jim, has been Shakespeare's, it's been Act 2 of Shakespeare's Impalo, meaning that the Democrats are impaling themselves. They're falling on their own swords. So I name this Impalo because this is an act. You know, the whole thing is, like we said last week, political masterpiece theater, Jim.
Well, it's not playing out the way they had intended, Louisa. That's a certainty. Not only that, but the 2020 Democratic frontrunners are historically unpopular. Really fascinating. The 538 looked at the favorable, unfavorable rating of the three 2020 Democratic candidates who are leading and found all three are underwater. This is almost unprecedented. As they currently stand, former Vice President Biden is upside down by a single point, 43.4 favorable to 44.3 unfavorable. Elizabeth Warren upside down by half a point, 39.8 favorable to 40.2 unfavorable. Bernie Sanders, 2 points, 43.9 to 45.2. Other than Hillary Clinton, who has a 9-point deficit, Jeb Bush at 20, Donald Trump minus 26 in 2016, and Newt Gingrich in 2012 at minus 15. This is unprecedented. In 2000, George W. Bush was up by 33 points. In 2008, Barack Obama was up by 20, John McCain by 15, John Edwards 13, even Rudy Giuliani by 12. Even Al Gore in 2000 was up 4 points. During her failed first run in 2008, Hillary was up by 2, but so was the hapless Mitt Romney in 2012. The number most surprising is Biden. Though he was Obama's vice president, Obama left office with approval ratings in the 60s. Biden is still underwater. Turns out Kamala Harris began to hit the skids, and her aides believe Tulsi was responsible after being attacked by Tulsi Gabbard. in the first Democratic primary. Harris did not respond sharply to an attack on her prosecutorial record from Gabbard, even after Harris had been prepped for the topics, the Times wrote. There are too many examples to cite, but she put over 1,500 people in jail for marijuana violations and laughed about it when she was asked if she ever smoked marijuana, Gabbard said at the debate. Gabbard also laid into Harris for maintaining a cash bail system that disproportionately hurt poor people, accusing Harris of having kept prisoners beyond their sentence to use them as cheap labor, and for blocking evidence that would have freed an innocent man from death row. The bottom line is, Senator Harris, when you were in a position to make a difference and impact in these people's lives, you did not, Gabbard declared. It was a brilliant performance. It was a surgical skewering of Harris, whom I regard as the most phony, fake, and fabricated of all of the candidates. Meanwhile, Michael Bloomberg has joined the 2020 race. As I've already observed, this is just ridiculous. Even though he's much richer than Trump, estimated at $55 billion, that Trump's $3 billion. The idea that an old white rich New York guy is going to defeat an old white rich guy on the Republican side is ridiculous, and it's going to foment tremendous rifts in the Democratic Party because the progressives would never approve of him. Elizabeth Warren has finally found a 2020 Democrat to attack, and Michael Bloomberg is a perfect illustration. Elizabeth Warren, who spent much of the election staying out of direct attacks on political opponents while railing against systematic corruption, faces a new reality, a 77-year-old rich guy worth $54 billion who's bulldozed into the Democratic primary. And Bernie Sanders, whose crusade against the billionaire class has become as ubiquitous as the finger wave that accompanies it, now has another reason to champ at the bit. Louisa, this is not going to help the Democrats. They're already in dire straits, and Bloomberg is only going to make matters worse.
Yeah, well, how about Senator Harris? How about, I mean, what did it look like? They had this little meeting this little circle meeting where they said, how about you get your nephew to pull out a false flag, claim that he was, racist, attacked as a racist, and then, let's pull out every fake, piece of propaganda we could, imagine. People are seeing it, Jim. As I said, if Shakespeare was alive, he would call this Impalo. They are falling on their own swords. This is the story of how the Democrats fell on their own sword. Impalo, that's my name for it.
And here's, I think, the intended solution where Obama has been conspiring against the Democratic candidates already, where Tucker uncovered signs Michelle Obama could be the Democrat secret 2020 nominee in a brilliant strategic move. I watched this broadcast. Tucker's the one show I recommend everyone should catch. Fox News, Tucker Carlson believes one of the only people who can bring Democrats together as a crowded primary field heads toward the 2020 nomination is someone who isn't even running yet. Carlson speculated on Tucker Carlson tonight about the many telling puzzle pieces lining up that could lead to former First Lady Michelle Obama as a 2020 contender, despite her previous contention she has no plans to run for president. Fox News also noted that the addition of former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg to the claustrophobic Democratic presidential race predicted the billionaire would not be able to buy the position because he's too old, too rich, too pale for the modern Democratic Party. Carlson told viewers there could still be surprises on the way for Democrats. If you're wondering who the Democratic nominee will be, don't bet against Michelle Obama, he said, pointing to signs her claims of ruling out a run might not be true. David Axelrod, who's Obama's closest, most loyal advisor, has been waging a scorched earth campaign against Joe Biden for months. The goal is presumably to weaken Obama's former vice president, who is apparently the front runner. Carlson said, noting Biden has taken hits from Axelrod, there's no chance that would be allowed without the consent of the Obamas. Not only has Obama refused to endorse Biden, he tried to stop Biden from running in the first place, Carlson said, adding, it's sad to watch the Democrat make excuses for why his good friend has not endorsed him. If Obama had endorsed Joe Biden, the race would be over. Biden would, in effect, be the nominee already, Carlson contended, suggesting perhaps the former president hasn't endorsed Biden because he has other plans. Meanwhile, Obama does not endorse Biden even after Joe's official go in 2020. We know about this. This is pulled up from the past just to reflect the fact that Obama has surprisingly, if you think that Joe Biden's a viable candidate, not endorsed him when that ought to have been obvious. Here you have from the Hill, a very politically savvy publication. Michelle Obama outshines all Democratic prospects for 2020. It cannot be overstated how eagerly the Democrats want to take back the House in 2020. That they face many obstacles, but the greatest threat is the fierce internal divisions within the party. Two of the leading presidential contenders, Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren, for example, have begun national fundraising operation. Former Vice President Biden has been busy building a national mailing list to communicate directly with his supporters. And Representative John Delaney has already announced his presidential candidacy, which he has already abandoned. So, I mean, I think this is right that Michelle is supposed to be, but there's a problem, a serious problem here, where Michelle's doctor has gone on record. I know what I saw. Dr. Rafael Espinoza, who was entrusted with former First Lady Michelle Obama's care during the 2008 presidential election, is speaking out about something he feels the public needs a definitive answer on. With all the talk about Mrs. Obama once being a man, Espinoza felt he couldn't keep his mouth shut any longer. I know what I saw. Michelle Obama is not a woman who used to be a man. Michelle Obama is just a man with breast implants and a huge shaving bill. On the campaign trail, no medical staff were allowed to go near her other than to take vitals if she got sick, which she never did. I know what I know because I walked in on him while he was taking a leak standing up in a bathroom in Trenton. They paid me millions for my silence, but after seeing what they did to this country, I just can't keep quiet. Let them sue me. Notice how Michelle Obama has a package that most women do not have, and was actually born Michael Robinson, played football at Ohio State before transferring to Princeton and adopting a female persona. Very diligent students have found the children and their real parents. This was a former physician attending Michelle who lent them out. Notice how the older girl looks just like her father, the younger just like her mother.
If you want to see it, great. Because that's the issue, is that this was, and he's talked about how he could get away with deceptive practices, what you can actually do with using deceptive and manipulative practices. You can become the president of the United States. Amazing. So
yeah.
And when I find it, I'll let you know.
He was purportedly vetted by Howard Dean, by Nancy Pelosi, by Chuck Schumer,
right?
I mean, and other prominent Democrats who certified he was eligible to serve as president of the United States when he was in fact not.
You mean
so
all
this is very stunning. And you see, bringing Michelle in late, like at a brokered convention, she hasn't gone through the vetting. She hasn't participated in the debates. My suspicion is she's enormously ignorant about policy issues. I mean, she and Barack have been voted year after year the most admired couple in America, but this is based upon the gullibility of Americans and believing what they're told and not recognizing what they actually are seeing. That is more revealing than the claims that are being made and foisted off on the public.
I agree, Jim. Vetted by the deep state, the ones who are protecting them and the ones who are paying for them and the ones who are running the mass media. Yeah, vetted really well. Vetted really well. Exactly.
It turns out that Ukraine, there's been influence peddling rings, a microcosm of how Imperial Washington works. This is by David Stockman, who was the head of management and budget under Ronald Reagan, from Information Clearinghouse. We hear some knucklehead on the War Channel, CNN, braying about Ukraine as a vitally important ally and strategic partner. The implication, of course, is that the Donald's attempted squeeze play on its new president was dangerously undermining national security. What unadulterated Tommy rot. The safety and security of the American homeland has absolutely nothing to do with it. That's because Ukraine is a no-count, strategically irrelevant patch of earth that was long ago ruined by the old Soviet Union and thereafter turned into an economic train wreck by its own corrupt oligarchs, along with plenty of help from Washington interventionists. The latter spent the post-Soviet years fomenting color revolutions and attempting to steer its politics toward the West and NATO membership. But when the Ukrainian people elected a pro-Russian president in 2010, in all efforts to bribe and bully him westward failed, Washington instigated, funded, and instantaneously recognized an illegal push on the streets of Kiev in February of 2014. Victoria Nuland was the point man on that operation. That blatant, unprovoked assault on a sovereign nation in turn set in motion a destructive civil war, internally dangerous and utterly unnecessary politico-military confrontation with Russia on its own doorstep, and now an hysterical campaign by the House Dems and their deep state allies to impeach a duly elected American president for the sin of wading into the very cesspool of corruption that the Washington establishment itself foisted upon this hapless $150 billion sliver of a failed state and crippled economy. The latest dispatch from the Wall Street Journal on the stench wafting toward from Kiev reveals more about the rotten foundations of Ukraine Gate than its authors probably understood. Burisma Holdings' campaign to clean up its image in the West reached beyond the 2014 hiring of Hunter Biden, son of then U.S. Vice President, to include other well-connected operatives in Washington, according to officials in both countries and government records. The Ukraine company owned by tycoon Mykola Zolochevsky also hired a lobbyist with close ties to then Secretary of State John Kerry, as well as a consulting group funded by top officials in the Clinton administration that specialized in preparing former Soviet bloc countries to join NATO, Blue Star strategy. Soon the effort bore fruit with the help of a New York-based lawyer. Mr. Zolochevsky's U.S. consultants argued to Ukrainian prosecutors that criminal cases against the company should be closed because no laws had been broken. Burisma later became a sponsor of a Washington think tank, the Atlantic Council, whose experts are often cited on energy and security policy in the former Soviet Union. Simple translation, Zolochevsky was an ally office holder, Minister of Ecology and Natural Resources, and inner circle thief in the ousted government of Viktor Yanukovych. He therefore needed to powder the pig fast and thoroughly in order to hold on to his ill-gotten billions. So he hired the best Washington influence peddlers that money could buy under the circumstances. First up was Hunter Biden, because his old man was running point on what amounted to the puppet government Washington had installed in Kiev, and Devin Archer, because he was a former bundler for former Senator and then Secretary of State John Kerry, who doesn't come out well in this. Meanwhile, LaRouche has published a very good piece on the third phase of the coup, treason in high places, as a fascist Ukraine coup comes home to roost in the U.S. And here we have a photograph of Barack Obama greeting the whistleblower, Eric Caramella, at the White House. Former UN weapons inspector Scott Ritter, who along with Lyndon LaRouche has exposed the Iraqi weapons of mass destruction hoax before Bush Cheney's 2003 invasion, has now performed another great service for his country and the world at another moment of maximum crisis. In a lengthy article published yesterday on Consortium News, Ritter presents a deeply sourced picture of who the so-called whistleblower really is, the unnamed who has now triggered impeachment proceedings against the President of the United States. No one who is serious about the immediate danger to the U.S. and to world peace will fail to read every word in this article. Ritter lays out the gravity of the case he will present in 3 paragraphs. The whistleblower complaint has opened a window into the politicalization of the intelligence community and the corresponding weaponization of the national security establishment against a sitting president. As I shall show, such actions are treasonous on their face, and the extent to which this conduct has permeated the intelligence community and its peripheral functions of government, including the National Security Council and Congress itself, will only be known if and when an investigation is conducted into what, in retrospect, is nothing less than a grand conspiracy by those ostensibly tasked with securing the nation to instead reverse the will of the American people regarding who serves as the nation's chief executive. The key to this narrative is the whistleblower himself. Understanding who he is and what role he has played in the events surrounding the fateful July 25th telephone conversation are essential to unraveling the various threads of this conspiracy. After graduating Yale in 2008 with a degree in Russian and Eastern European studies, postgraduate study at Harvard, and work experience with the World Bank, the so-called whistleblower went through the CIA's 4-month career analyst program and was assigned to the Office of Russian and Eurasian Analysis, or OREA, in the CIA's Directorate of Intelligence. This was the period of the so-called reset under Obama's Russian advisor, Michael McFaul, who was trying to manipulate differences between then Russian President Mendeleev and Prime Minister Putin. When Putin returned to the Russian presidency in 2012, this group began to plan what became the 2014 fascist coup in Ukraine. It is clear that the whistleblower was in the center of the coup planning, since in July 2015, as a very young man, a kid really, he was detailed to the NSC staff at the Obama White House as director for Ukrainian affairs. Such NSC positions were intended for senior analysts at the GS-15 civil service level, while the whistleblower was given a waiver to assume the post as a GS-13. His candidacy had to have been approved both by Peter Clement, director of OREA, and CIA Director John Brennan. In this position, the whistleblower reported to Charles Kupchan, Senior Director for European Affairs at the NSC, who reported directly to Obama's National Security Advisor, Susan Rice. His arrival at the White House coincided with the start of the Trump candidacy. Like everyone on the White House staff, the whistleblower was shocked by Trump's election victory in November of 2016. Susan Rice was alarmed by activities of the Trump transition team. She closely monitored the investigation into so-called Russian interference in the election, which began to order the unmasking of the identities of Trump-related Americans and foreign intercepts. She's going to go down very, very hard with the IG report, Louise, I predict. When UAE Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed visited New York to meet with Trump transition officials amidst rumors that he would be a Trump-backed channel to Russia, Rice ordered unmasking of intelligence reports pertaining to that visit. The principal NSC staffers who would logically have advised her were Kupchan, the whistleblower, and his close friend, Sean Misko, NSC director for the Gulf states. Thereafter, Rice ordered near continuous unmasking of intelligence reports involving Trump's national security advisor, Michael Flynn, logically advised by the same group. When McMaster replaced Flynn, fired because of leaks in which the whistleblower probably had a part, McMaster tried to restore the NSC functioning to that under Obama. Then when Fiona Hill arrived in April of 2017 to be NSC director for Russia and Europe, the whistleblower was out of a job. But instead of returning him to CIA, McMaster hired him as his personal assistant and moved him from the old executive building down the street into the White House, giving him direct access to everything that crossed McMaster's desk. Yet the White House refused the usual one-year extension to his 2-year NSC assignment in July 2017, so the whistleblower returned to CIA. Soon after he left, full transcripts of Trump's January 28, 2017 conversations with the leaders of Mexico and Australia were leaked to the press. While some of his NSC colleagues believed the whistleblower was behind the leaks, McMaster refused to authorize a formal investigation, which could have ended the whistleblower's career at CIA. Nevertheless, despite having left under a cloud of suspicion, the whistleblower was rehired at NSC Deputy National Intelligence Office for Russia and Eurasia in June of 2018, right back at the center of Ukraine policy. How unusual. Director of National Intelligence Dan Coates would have approved the appointment. Once back at the NSC, the whistleblower developed a professional relationship with the new director for Ukraine at the NSC, Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, with whom he appears to have shared concern over Trump's views on Russia and Ukraine. As a witness, Vindman said he shared concerning aspects of Trump's July 25, 2019 Ukraine call with an authorized intelligence community contact, but Representative Schiff refused to allow any discussion of that person's identity, strongly suggesting it was the whistleblower. After being informed of the call, the whistleblower began preparing notes and assembling information and made many calls to U.S. government officials he knew from his office work. using a computer system approved for handling classified data. Then he began discussion with Representative Schiff's House Intelligence Committee staffer. That staff included 2 NSC veterans, one of them whistleblower's friend, Sean Misko. From there, he went to the lawyers group, Whistleblower 8. One of its founders, Mark Zaid, had tweeted, "Coup has started. As one falls, 2 more will take place," in January 2017. Representative Schiff has moved from insisting on the whistleblower's testimony to refusing to allow him to testify, even in closed session, presumably because he wants to avoid legitimate questions Republicans might ask. Namely, what was a deputy national intelligence officer of the U.S. intel community doing investigating activities of a sitting president? Who, if anyone, authorized this intervention in U.S. domestic political affairs by a CIA official? How did the whistleblower, who has a history of documented animosity with the Trump administration, including credible allegation of leaking sensitive material to the press for the express purpose of undermining the credibility of the president, get selected to serve as a deputy national intelligence officer? Who signed off on that assignment? What was the precise role played by the whistleblower in unmasking the identities of U.S. citizens in 2016 during the Trump transition? There is, however, the major issue looming in the background of this impeachment frenzy: the intervention by elements of the intelligence community in the domestic political affairs of the United States. There's no question a whistleblower's complaint served as a genesis for the ongoing impeachment proceedings. Louise, I regard that as quite a brilliant summary of what's been going on here and of the role of this guy whose identity is, in fact, well known in Washington,
Right.
Gary Caramella.
Oh, am I on mute? No, I'm not.
Nope.
Okay, well, it does, yeah, you're right about Susan Rice. And as this document, you know, if I can't validate the authenticity of this, but I can tell you the source that I got it from was very authentic. Here it is at this whole, you know, renewal of Project Folsom, which was all of this illegal spying on the president, the intelligence gathering into the Trump organization and Donald Trump for president. Was at the request of Advisor Rice, Susan Rice. So I believe that you're right, Jim. I think you're right. I think as a result of this whole D-class, you know, people are going to fall on their own swords. This is what I've been saying. Absolutely.
It's extremely serious stuff. And Susan Rice is not going to come out of this well. Mm. Meanwhile, we have the government subsidies on a humongous scale right here in Wisconsin. This is like billions of public subsidies for a Taiwan company known as Foxconn. A new study on government subsidies by George Mason University found Wisconsin's deal with Foxconn will not work and could actually reduce economic activity in southeastern Wisconsin. Researchers with a Virginia-based Mercatus Center at the university focused on the Foxconn deal because of its size and high profile. In its study, the economics of a targeted economic development subsidy, George Mason researchers found targeted subsidies are more likely to diminish rather than enhance the economic prosperity of communities that offer them. Researchers based their study on $3.6 billion in state incentives, taking into account the $3 billion incentive packages approved by the GOP-controlled state legislature in 2017. And an additional $600 million in utility road train programs and economic development needed for the project. In 2017, the village of Mount Pleasant and Racine County created a special financing district to pay for a $764 million investment to support the Foxconn project. The investment has since been increased to $911 million, nearly $1 billion. Wisconsin is pretty much already on the hook for already $1 billion in subsidies if Foxconn were to leave tomorrow. The only question is how much further does it go, said Michael Farron, an economist and head researcher of the study. Emails to Republican legislative leaders and Governor Tony Evers, new governor who's a Democrat office. This was all done under Scott Walker, the former Republican governor, were not returned. The Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation did not respond to a request for comments either. Assembly Minority Leader Gordon Hintz, a Democrat from Oshkosh, said legislators knew large subsidies often don't pay off, even when Foxconn was being debated. I think there was an appetite for a smaller investment, but the scale of this, even under the best case scenario, had a 25-year payback. And of course, the project has changed. It looks like the best case scenario has been made much worse, Hines said. It comes at a time and reaffirms what we know. But the fact that Wisconsin went well and above what traditional incentives are, I think that put us in an even worse position. A recent state audit found on the average, firms receiving Wisconsin subsidies create only about 34% the promised jobs. Among its findings, George Mason researchers found the Taiwan-based electronics manufacturing company could have come to Wisconsin even without an incentives package. And job goals can hamper economic development. Local talent resources and CEO preference are often the reason a company chooses its location, not the subsidy being offered, the study found. For the typical subsidy, it only matters between 2 and 25% of the time. Foxconn is not as easy to pinpoint. Its large LCD manufacturing display facilities around the world have been massively subsidized by local and national governments. Wisconsin is probably the best place to locate because of its access to water resources and other utilities, and the fact that Wisconsin already has a 0% corporate income tax for manufacturing firms. Proponents of targeted economic development policies often argue they can create industry in clusters. In Foxconn case, Wisconsin officials have been discussing Wisconsin Valley for 2 years. But the study found specialization should be a natural course to be efficient, using market signals. Subsidies can encourage a firm to ignore its or its region's natural competitive advantage, oblivious of what economists have called regional realism, the study found. Consider this fanciful but feasible alternative. The $3.6 billion in subsidies that Wisconsin promised Foxconn could instead have built 7 square miles of greenhouses to remove orange growers, to motivate orange growers to move from Florida. If Wisconsin was the right place for LCD manufacturing firms, I would argue they would probably already be locating there, Farron said. The study also aimed to quantify the cost of the subsidy, looking at the $3.6 billion that could be paid to Foxconn over 15 years if all job goals are met. The study contends the subsidy represents just over 1% of all tax revenue Wisconsin's expected to receive over the next 15 years. If instead Wisconsin were to decrease its taxes by 1%, the state would see $20 billion more in economic development. The study also argues attaching subsidies to job goal incentives a company to continue on a path that might no longer be economically viable. This already happened with Foxconn. The company originally was going to build large flat screens with so-called Gen 10.5 plant. Foxconn said market changes prompted the company to shift to a smaller Gen 6 facility. In early 2019, Foxconn executive hedged briefly on whether they'd be doing any manufacturing in the state at all. Now they say the Gen 6 facility will begin to operate in late 2020. If it doesn't make sense to build LCD displays in the US or even in southeastern Wisconsin, then it shouldn't be done, Farron said. And if you try to force something to happen, you're going to end up with more economic waste. Foxconn's 1 million square foot manufacturing plant is currently under construction in Mount Pleasant. The company has remained committed that it'll create 13,000 jobs in Wisconsin. WEDC will receive a report from Foxconn on December 31st to discover whether the company qualifies for further state tax credits. Louisa, it's a complete disaster. In fact, it even looks like they're going to do most of their hiring from northern Illinois, not even from Wisconsin.
I had, Jim, was what are the criteria, what are the data points they're saying why they should get the subsidy? How is it supposed to improve just by jobs alone? That's supposed to improve the quality? That's supposed to be somehow a benefit to the local region. But you're saying the jobs aren't even going to come from that region. So don't they?
This was a corrupt act by the Scott Walker administration of Republican leaders. I'm sure they got payoffs for this. It was outrageous. It's not in the interest of the people of Wisconsin. When I moved to Wisconsin in 2007, it was a magnificent state. It was pro-labor. It was very green sensitive. It was very public education oriented. There was a proposal to have high-tech rail from Milwaukee to Madison. Walker scuttled that and gave up $800 million in federal spending. He then took $800 million out of public education. He went on a campaign against the labor unions for the state employees. He was doing his best and largely succeeded in converting Wisconsin into the Mississippi of the Midwest. It's been a disgrace, and it will take decades, literally decades, for Wisconsin to regain, only in part, where it stood before his occupancy of the governor's mansion right here in Wisconsin.
You know, all I have to say is one word: Impalo. Because here's another example, like, you know, Alexandra Ocasio Cortex. I don't know. I don't know.
Occasional Cortex.
Yeah. You know, she didn't want Amazon jobs there, right? And so they lost out on that revenue. They lost out on the jobs that would have created. And how is that good? How is that good for New York? You know, but
no, I know, absolutely right.
I mean,
but look, Ocasio-Cortez is driven by ideology. Scott Walker is driven by greed and corruption. And I don't put him in the same class. No,
but it doesn't matter really what they're doing. The Democrats are falling on their own sword. These are bad policies, regardless of the reason.
Yeah, but remember this, Foxconn. Scott Walker's a Republican. He was doing that to promote, you know, what he thought was a Republican agenda to destroy Wisconsin, and he largely succeeded. I'm sorry to say.
Yeah, I think he's a rhino.
No, he's just a disgusting human being.
He's Republican in name only. He's a rhino.
No, he's the old Republican, the more corrupt party, Louisa.
Old guard. All right.
Formed the party, made it into a populist Republican party. Here's a very important article by Doug Brando that Trump has to understand that a war with Iran would be hell. Very significant. 16 years ago, George W. Bush administration manipulated intelligence to scare the public into backing an aggressive war against Iraq. The smoking gun mushroom clouds that National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice warned about didn't exist. But the invasion, long desired by neocons and other hawks, proceeded. Liberated Iraqis rejected U.S. plans to create an American puppet state on the Euphrates, and the aftermath turned into a humanitarian and geopolitical catastrophe which continues to roil the Middle East to this day. Thousands of dead Americans, tens of thousands of wounded and maimed U.S. personnel, hundreds of thousands of dead Iraqis, millions of Iraqis displaced. There was the sectarian conflict, destruction of the historic Christian community, the creation of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which morphed into the far deadlier Islamic State, and the enhanced influence of Iran. The prime question was, how could so many supposedly smart people be so dumb? Now the Trump administration appears to be following the same well-worn path. The president is fixated on Iran, tearing up the nuclear accord with Tehran and declaring economic war, as well as anyone dealing with Iran. He is pushing America toward war, even as he insists he wants peace. How stupid does he think we are? Naturally, the administration blames Iran for not accepting its supposedly generous offer to talk. However, Tehran has no reason to believe Washington is serious. One doesn't have to be a hardline Shiite Ayatollah to see little point in negotiating with a president seemingly determined on surrender or war, and who can't be counted on to keep any agreement he makes. Indeed, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo recently proposed talks without preconditions, other than that Iran needed to behave as a normal nation and accede to Washington's many impossible demands even before sitting down at the negotiating table. National Security Advisor John Bolton later explained the president was prepared to talk about the future only after Iran gave up their nuclear and other unacceptable activities. In other words, Iran needed to surrender first. The U.S. would not negotiate under such circumstances. Why would Iran do that itself? The Iranian regime is maligned. Nevertheless, despite being under almost constant siege, it has survived longer than the U.S. crafted dictatorship which preceded the Islamic State. That was the Shah of Iran, who came to power after a coup engineered by Kermit Roosevelt, a cousin of Theodore, on behalf of the CIA, took out their democratically elected government and imposed a tyrannical Shah. Most Americans think that Iran took our embassy in 1979 was the first strike, but it was really reclaiming Iranian sovereignty, control over their own nation from a puppet government installed by the United States. The latter did not arise in a vacuum. Washington did much to encourage a violent extremist revolution in Tehran. The average Iranian could be forgiven for viewing America as a virulently hostile power, determined to do his or her nation ill at almost every turn. Rather continue a military spiral upward, Washington should diffuse Gulf tension. The administration brought the Middle East to a boil. It can calm the waters. Washington should stand down its military, offering to host multinational discussion with oil-consuming nations, energy companies, and tanker operations over establishing shared naval security in sensitive waterways, including in the Middle East. Given America's growing domestic energy production, the issue no longer should be considered Washington's responsibility. Other wealthy industrialized states should do what is necessary for their economic security. The administration should also make a serious proposal for talks. It won't be easy. Iran Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei declared negotiation has no benefit and carries harm. He further argued that negotiations are a tactic of this pressure, which is the ultimate strategic aim. Even President Hassan Rouhani rejected contact without a change in U.S. policy. Whenever they lift the unjust sanctions and fulfill their commitments and return to the negotiating table, which they left themselves, the door is not closed. In back-channel discussions, Iranians supposedly suggested the U.S. reverse the latest sanctions, at least on oil sales, ending attempts to wreck Iran's economy. If the president seriously desires talks with Tehran, then he should demonstrate that he does not expect preemptive surrender. The administration should suspend its maximum pressure campaign and propose multilateral talks on tightening the nuclear agreement in return for additional American and allied concessions, such as further sanctions relief. Meanwhile, cross our red lines and be destroyed. Iran's elite Republican Guard chief warns U.S., Israel, and Saudi Arabia at a large rally. All external foes will be defeated if they make moves against Iran, the Islamic Republic's Revolutionary Guard Corps commander warned at a massive pro-government rally amid protests over fuel price hikes. Major General Hossein Salami addressed people in downtown Tehran, said the country's rivals are no longer capable of anything in their attacks against the nation. We have showed patience toward the hostile moves of America, the Zionist regime, Israel, and Saudi Arabia against the Islamic Republic of Iran. But we will destroy them if they cross our red line. Thousands have marched on the streets of the country's capital and gathered on the Equilon Square, Revolutionary Square, calling themselves supporters of the leadership. The demonstrators waved national flags, carried placards, and chanted slogans in support of the supreme leader of the current government. Some were also seen burning American flags. The rally is meant to denounce anyone who wants to create insecurity in the country, one demonstrator told the state-run news agency. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Abbas Mousavi said the demonstration shows the foreign states to see who the real people in Iran are and what they are saying. Iran has been hit by protests in various parts of the country after the government, under pressure from the U.S., began to ration fuel and approved a hike on fuel prices in the hope additional revenue could be used for subsidies to poor families. Amid peaceful demonstrations, some angry mobs also torched banks and department stores, as well as attacked police stations, killing several officers. The authorities said there were dead and injured among the protesters as well. Louisa, this is just an indication that the U.S. foreign policy toward Iran is in a shambles. It was a colossal mistake, in my opinion, to abandon the Iran deal, which was one very powerful, major positive contribution of the Obama administration.
Well, Jim, you know, you and I have little different points of view on this. I think that this is the deep state, which is a global operation. That is the element that's within that Iran causing these problems. Just like, you know, the propagandists and the provocateurs sent into the riots in Hong Kong and into the riots in France, you know, you have an element there that's trying to show all this American hatred. When I've showed just in the beginning of the program, QAnon supporters in Iran, make Iran great again. The people get it. So there's a division. They divided us among, the propaganda versus, the push towards, making better policy. I think it's the deep state. I think it's the
Just to
deep
make a
state.
simple, obvious point, Iran is a peace-loving nation that hasn't launched a war of aggression against any other state since 1775. The Trump foreign policy toward Iran, I'm sorry to say, is the Israeli foreign policy. It even appears to be dictated by Bibi Netanyahu, and I don't like it. I'm a very strong supporter of President Trump. But in dealing with Iran, he's making all the wrong moves.
Well, because it goes to show you that you're not seeing who is really running Iran. That's who he's dealing with. It's the shadow government behind the leader, and that's the problem. The leaders always get that's how it's been in the United States. We've had our own shadow government here.
Louisa, I have been to Iran. I have appeared on Iranian television 100 times, and I'm telling you that's just not true. The Iranian people, this is a civilization of thousands of years of age. Compared to us, we're mere kids on the block.
I'm not disagreeing.
These persons are of great integrity, Louisa.
But that has nothing to do with what I said. I never said these people didn't have integrity. I never said they were anything but peace-loving people. I'm not talking about the people of Iran. I'm talking about the shadow government that runs it. That's the problem.
We agree to disagree.
Okay, my friend.
There you go. Meanwhile, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons has been accused by one of its own members of manipulating their report on the alleged chemical attack said to have taken place in Douma in Syria on April 7th of 2018. We know it was a staged attack. In report to the alleged event, the US, UK, and France carried out airstrikes on the Syrian government on April 14th. The author of the email was a member of a fact-finding team of the OPCW sent to Douma to investigate. The author accuses the OPCW of selectively omitting certain facts. The email dated June 22nd reads, many of the facts and observations outlined in the full version are inextricably interconnected, and by selectively omitting certain ones, an unintended bias has been introduced into the report, undermining its credibility. I believe it was intended. There was nothing unintended about it. The OPCW team analyzed cylinders at 2 different locations at Douma. The OPCW report said they had sufficient evidence to determine chlorine was likely released from cylinders. The author of the email called this claim highly misleading and not supported by the facts. The author said the samples they analyzed were in contact with a chemical that contained a chlorine atom, which could have been a number of chemicals, and purposely singling out one of chlorine gas is disingenuous. The OPCW report said there were high levels of various chlorinated organic derivatives detected in environmental samples. But the email observed describing the levels as high overstates the extent of levels that were detected. They were in most cases only in parts per billion, as low as 1 to 2 parts per billion, which is essentially trace quantities. Videos of victims of the alleged attack appeared online, circulate news networks, and according to the email, the original report had a section that discussed inconsistencies with the victim's symptoms between what witnesses reported seeing and what was seen in the video. The email's author says a section was omitted from the redacted report, obviously, again, deliberately. Omitting the section of the report, including the epidemiology, which has been removed in its entirety, has a serious negative impact on the report, as this section is inextricably linked to the chemical agent identified. It either supports or detracts from the confidence in the identity of any possible chemical. In this case, the confidence in the identity of chlorine or any other choking agent is drawn into question precisely because of the inconsistency with the reported and observed symptoms. The inconsistency was not only noted by the fact-finding mission team, but strongly supported by 3 toxicologists with experience and exposure to chemical warfare agent. This email is a second leak from an OPCW member related to the alleged Duma attack. An unreleased OPCW engineering report was leaked to the Working Group on Syria, Propaganda and Media earlier this year. The Syrian rebels claimed the cylinders the engineering team examined were dropped out of a Syrian government aircraft. The unreleased document does not corroborate that story. The leaked engineering report concluded that the state, the FFM, fact-finding mission engineering subteam, cannot be certain the cylinders at either location arrived there as a result of being dropped from an aircraft. The engineering team, in fact, suspected the cylinders were manually placed at the scene. In summary, observations at the scene of the two locations, together with subsequent analysis, suggests there's a higher probability that both cylinders were manually placed at those two locations rather than being delivered from aircraft. Meanwhile, Iraqi forces killed 28 protesters after Iranian consulate torch. This all appears to be fabricated, a CIA operation. Protesters stormed Iranian consulate in Najaf. Anti-government protests began in October. Commander says will protect Shiite Muslim authorities. Consulate attack shows intense anti-Iranian sentiment. Updates death toll adds bridge blockage attack on compound. Baghdad. Iraqi security forces shot dead at least 28 protesters on Thursday after demonstrators stormed and torched an Iranian consulate overnight in what could mark a turning point in the uprising against its Iran-backed authority. At least 24 people died when the troops opened fire on demonstrators who blocked a bridge in the southern city of Nasiriyah before dawn. Medical sources said dozens were wounded. 4 others were killed in Baghdad, where security forces opened fire with live ammunition and rubber bullets against protesters. The incident marked one of the bloodiest days since the uprising began at the start of October, with anti-corruption demonstrations that have since swelled into a revolt against authorities, scorned by young demonstrators as stooges of Tehran. In Najaf, a city of ancient pilgrimage shrines that serves as the seat of Iraq's powerful Shiite clergy, the Iranian consulate was reduced to a charred ruin after it was stormed overnight. Protesters accused the Iraqi authorities of turning against their own people to defend Iran. All the riot police in Najaf and the security forces started shooting at us as if we were burning Iraq as a whole. A protester who witnessed the burning of the consulate told Reuters, asking he not be identified. Another protester, Ali, described the attack on the consulate as a brave act and a reaction from the Iraqi people. We don't want the Iranians. Louisa, any thoughts you may have?
Yeah, there was a report. Am I on mute? Yeah. Actually, I tweeted a photo of one of the protesters getting into one of the, I guess you would call it one of the presidential palaces there, sitting in one of the seats that the leaders sit in for a photo. Actually, if you want, I can screen share it for you. But, you know, according to them, they wanted, you know, to, here it is, I think, make a statement that, you know, they are going to take back control if they're not, if the people who they, you know, or their leaders are not going to represent them, if they feel like they're not being represented. I don't know, I'm not on the ground there, so I don't know what the facts are with respect to this particular photo. I'm going to see if I could find that. Oh yeah, the London Bridge false flag. The guy who supposedly was shot got up and started walking away afterwards. That's another, I happened to see that as I'm scrolling through. Where's that? Here's the photo. Here we go. Let me screen share this and let's see what's going on with it, Jim, because this is something that came out of Iraq. Iraqi protesters take over government buildings and sit on chairs of the elected officials that failed them. This is the picture right here. Now, you know, what is this really saying? Who are these people really? If somebody's clearly unhappy about what's going on with, you know, in Iran, there have been protests there for quite some time now. So, you know, returning the power back to the people. So they want to get rid of the corruption, and I think, you know, that's what Trump's trying to do everywhere, and he's meeting a lot of pushback. You know, they don't want to give up that gravy train. So I just wanted to make that comment.
Thanks.
Thank you, Jim.
Indeed.
Oh, you've got it right
here. As you were
here.
suggesting, we had this alleged London Bridge Hoax terrorist attack before an election. A knife-wielding killer is supposed to have murdered 2 people on the bridge. But it's another staged attack. I mean, this is unbelievably bad. Watch this here. We don't even need the sound, Louisa.
No.
Just watch in the red. There's the dead guy. He's been shot twice by the police. Look at that. Look at that.
Yeah.
Look at that.
That's fake news, my friend.
Louisa,
how much
here
they pay
comes
him?
again. Look at this. Dead man resurrected. Resurrected.
It's a second coming.
Oh,
Wow.
Louisa, this is so
fake.
embarrassing. So bad. So bad. Meanwhile, the Iraqi PM says he'll resign after weeks of violent protests. This is very unfortunate. This guy was a brilliant prime minister, and he's clearly being forced out by those who don't want Iraq to be independent. The Iraqi prime minister has announced his resignation after the country stopped Shia Muslim current, called for lawmakers to reconsider their support for a government rocked by weeks of deadly anti-establishment unrest fomented by the CIA. In response to this call, and in order to facilitate it as quickly as possible, I will present to Parliament a demand to accept my resignation from the leadership of the current government, said Abdel Abul Mahdi. The statement did not say when he would resign. Parliament is to convene an emergency session to discuss the crisis. Grand Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani earlier urged Parliament to consider withdrawing its support for Abdul Mahdi's government. This stems spiraling viral. As I say, however, it's all fabricated. Meanwhile, security forces shot dead at least 3 people in the southern city of Syria as clashes continue. Iraqi forces had killed nearly 400 mostly young unarmed demonstrators since mass anti-government protests broke out on 1 October. More than a dozen members of the security forces have also died in clashes. The burning of Iran's consulate in the whole city of Najaf on Wednesday escalated violence and drew a brutal response from security forces, who shot dead more than 60 people nationwide. The unrest is Iraq's biggest crisis in years. It pits protesters from Shia heartlands in Baghdad in the south against a corrupt Shia-dominated ruling elite, seen as pawns of Iran. Iraq's current political class is drawn mainly from powerful Shia politicians, clerics, and paramilitary leaders, including many who lived in exile before the US-led invasion overthrew the Sunni dictator Saddam Hussein in 2003. Sistani, who weighs in on politics only in times of crisis and wields huge influence over public opinion, urged Friday against an explosion of civil strife and tyranny. He urged government forces to stop killing protesters and told demonstrators to reject all violence. In fact, it turns out there was a brilliant critique of this by Kevin Barrett on Iranian television, explaining how the prime minister was really making a lot of moves to promote the Iraqi use of Iraqi resources, keeping the Western out from exploiting. He was making a whole lot of moves that were very appropriate to promote the integrity and independence of Iraq. And it appears that these events are being staged in order to defeat those efforts. And he's a very good man being forced out by pro-Western forces who don't like what he's doing with Iraq.
No comment, Jim. No comment. Keep going.
Meanwhile, Amnesty International is observing Facebook and Google are abusing human rights. This is very, very significant. Amnesty International issued a scathing indictment of the world's dominant internet corporations, arguing in a new report that Google and Facebook should be forced to abandon what it calls their surveillance-based business model because it's predicated on human rights abuses. The London-based global rights group said in a 60-page report published Thursday, the business model of what it calls surveillance giants is inherently incompatible with the right to privacy. Google and Facebook likewise threaten a range of other rights, including freedom of expression and the right to equality and non-discrimination. The report said the company's practice of vacuuming up personal data in order to feed voracious advertising businesses represents an unprecedented assault on privacy rights. It says the companies force people to make a Faustian bargain to share their data to gain access to Google and Facebook services that have grown to dominate the global public square. This ubiquitous surveillance has undermined the very essence of the right to privacy, adding companies' use of algorithmic systems to create and infer detailed profiles on people interferes with our ability to shape our own identities within a private sphere. Amnesty called on governments to legally guarantee people's right not to be tracked by advertisers or other third parties. It called current regulations and the company's own privacy shielding measures inadequate. In a written 5-page response published with the report, Facebook disagreed with the conclusions that their practices are inconsistent with human rights principles. Steve Slatterfield, Facebook's public policy director, also disputed the social media behemoth's business model is surveillance-based, which is overwhelmingly obvious. It was, in fact, a CIA method to spy on the American people that's been fabulously successful, and noted that users sign up voluntarily for the service, which is nominally free, although data collected is used to sell ads. A person's choice to use Facebook services and the way we collect, receive, or use data, all clearly disclosed and acknowledged by users, cannot meaningfully be likened to the involuntary and often unlawful government surveillance described in international human rights laws. The Google did not offer an on-the-record response to the record, but disputed its findings. Amnesty said the company provides input in publicly available documents. Meanwhile, here we have a social media political news paradox from a new poll. It's one of America's leading sources for news about the government, yet also among the least trusted. Social media, a new poll finds, is America's political news paradox. Julie Ferguson, an occupational therapist in Central Washington, remembers getting TV news from just a handful of networks. I grew up watching Walter Cronkite, she said. Today she sees more political news on social media than anywhere else. She doesn't trust it, but worries many others do. The information they're getting, who knows where it's coming from? The irony of where Americans get their news about the government and what sources they rely on to deliver news about the government they can trust was exposed in a survey published this month by the Associated Press, NORC study of public opinion research in USA Facts. It found 54% of Americans say they get government-related information from social media at least once a day, compared with 52% who said they get information about government daily from local TV news, 50% from national TV news, 47% from cable news, 19% from nationally circulated newspapers. The poll also found Americans are significantly more likely to say they get information from social media repeatedly throughout the day than to say the same of any other news source. Yet the survey found only 11% of Americans say they trust information about government they see on social media, a great deal or quite a bit. Nearly 2/3 said they have little to no trust in government news they find there. Of all the potential places to find news about government included in the survey, social media was the least trusted. While awareness about misinformation on social media has increased in recent years, many are still confused about how they can get reliable news, said Stephanie Edgerly, an associate professor at Northwestern who researches changing media landscapes. It's really dangerous to make people aware, concerned, and afraid, but not pair that with strategies to engage. What we're observing right now is people get the message that fake news, disinformation exists online. What they haven't done a really good job is getting the message out there is where they can go for information they can trust. Americans are somewhat more trusting of the information about government they get from more traditional news sources, such as newspapers or local TV news. Distrust is still widespread, however, no matter the source. According to the survey, the most trusted source for information about government is public TV and radio, with 31% saying they have a great deal or quite a bit of trust in outlets such as PBS or NPR. So Louisa, that tends to confirm what you were saying earlier. I would observe the beauty of the internet is that you get all points of view, whereas the mainstream presents only one, and it's coming from a scripted source. If it's predominant in the mainstream on a controversial subject, you can almost guarantee it's false or misleading. You have to go to the internet and develop the technique of contrasting alternative reports to determine which are the more credible.
Absolutely, Jim. And sooner or later, the people will wake up to this. I think, I was at a gathering over the weekend, and very educated, well-to-do people. And finally, the conversation is, I don't even put the television on anymore. It's so negative. And they don't watch the news. They will read it in the newspaper. So they're going back to the more, traditional. They're a little bit older, but So they remember newspapers, not like my kids who have no idea what it is. But, you know, I mean, they will read the newspaper, Jim, but they don't want to watch the mainstream media. They don't want to
Yeah.
watch the television.
Well, the television, the most powerful instrument of propaganda ever devised by the hand of man. Without any question.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Now, here's a fascinating story that you are going to agree with 100%. Americans simply can't afford lawyers anymore. In America, legal counsel is not guaranteed in civil cases the way it is in criminal. And with a sky-high cost of lawyers, it's increasingly leading to a two-tiered justice system, those who can afford counsel and those who cannot. More and more Americans are now representing themselves, with just 1 in 4 civil defendants represented by counsel. This is down from nearly all defendants having lawyers in 1992, according to a 2015 study. The number of litigants without lawyers has risen in the 4 years since the study as well. The opportunity for justice is the bedrock of the American legal system, but pro se litigants up against attorneys are unlikely to win their cases or settle on beneficial terms. Trish McAllister, head of the Texas Access to Justice Commission, said, "It's really a crisis. People aren't able to get into courts and they're not able to navigate them once they're there. Most civil cases are usually about debt collection, landlord-tenant disputes, home foreclosure. Lawyers will build their cases around litigants' inexperience and inability to hire competent counsel." Terry Larson, a legal aid attorney in Missouri, said, "These guys know they're going to win. Their hope of hopes is that nobody will go get lawyers. And it's not always about winning or losing in civil cases." Sylvia Naglub, an attorney at Public Counsel, a California pro bono legal firm, commented, "Lawyers can help negotiate better settlements. There's a stark difference between the agreement signed by self-representing litigants versus what I get for clients. Courts have very little mercy for litigants who represent themselves. Some offer resources like volunteers and online forums, but judges are required to hold pro se litigants to the same standard as those with counsel. Linda Leva lost her home to foreclosure last year and said judges could be perplexing. In 2017, a court rejected her motion for a continuance so she could further prepare her case. But a month later, it approved the other side's continuance so the lawyer could take a vacation. There are still ongoing efforts to help litigants who can't afford counsel, however. An organization called Civil Gideon is trying to expand the right to counsel to cover certain civil disputes. They were backed by the American Bar Association in 2006, but there remain questions how the state would pay for the program. Now, my case is a perfect illustration because I was found liable on a pro se movement in which the judge acted inconsistent with the law and the requirements of due process for summary judgments. It was a case back in the 18th century. Lord Mansfield asserted the greater the truth, the greater the liability, because the truth was more likely to be believed, and if the truth was disadvantageous to the party about whom it was being proclaimed, that therefore affected their standing and reputation. The truth. But in my case, my motions for after trial include that the court never, the plaintiffs never proved negligence, and therefore the finding of liability was invalid. It's not the case that you can find liability without fault. They had to find I was at fault. They never found I was at fault. In addition, there was irrelevant and prejudicial testimony regarding contempt, where I convinced that the plaintiff was not the person he pretended to be, whose image has been published millions of times around the world, shared the video deposition with 2 other parties I believe could confirm that I was right, that this is not the same person. And one of them, Wolfgang Halbig, jumped all over it in spades. I actually got the images into the court record, so now they're part of the official record. This is absolutely fascinating. If you go to one of the articles I'll cite here, you can follow up and judge for yourself whether this guy, where the plaintiff's attorney took extraordinary measures to conceal his image, would do that. As I observed, given his image has appeared millions of times around the world, the only reason for concealing his image now is if it's not the same guy. Nevertheless, I was held in contempt and had to shell out a $7,000 fine. Third, no proof of incitement or a causal chain produced to show the sentences over which I was being sued, which described the document, the death certificate that I published in the book as a fabrication. had led to any of the actions, including the alleged post-traumatic stress that was allegedly suffered by the plaintiff, where their counsel, who never met the plaintiff, but only interviewed him over the phone for an hour on the basis of false information given to him, that I'd harassed the plaintiff, which was false, that I'd had phone calls with him, which was false, that I denied the existence of his son, which is also false. I explain now the images of his son were made his son a fiction because they were based upon photographs of his older stepbrother as a child. That, of course, was never explained because it was so revealing. And that I had claimed that he had fabricated the death certificate himself, which I'd never done, but which made it into the news reports worldwide for fake news, and motion after trial that it violate both First Amendment and public policy issues for me to be published for my reporting. Here's a news story, by the way, a Minnesota lawyer, which has as its subtitle, defamation defendant accused him of faking son's death certificate, where the lawyers were being praised for helping a Sandy Hook dad prevail over an offense I had not committed. The great public interest in this case had led me to make some of the most important documents, from the complaint to the oral hearing to the court order, available. Sandy Hook, Posner versus Fetzer lawsuit, the basic documents. This also, by the way, is a Drawn Avery on Minnesota lawyer. Lawyers help Sandy Hook dad prevail, and you can find links to the three here I'm giving. You can also get the reports of the two forensic document examiners who certified that I was correct, that the death certificate I described as a fabrication was a fabrication, and that three other death certificates that had surfaced during the course of the trial were also fabrications, which the court simply set aside, violating the standards for summary judgment, which required that all of the defendant's arguments have to be assumed to be well-founded and true, in rendering the determination, which he did not do. Even the Yale Daily News, our nation's oldest student newspaper, got it wrong. They even had the wrong title for the book. They claimed that I had authored the book when in fact it was edited with 13 contributors, including 6 current or retired PhD professors. Here are the images, which I actually got into the case about contempt. This is the man who showed up for the video deposition. This is a man whose images appeared around the world. I maintain they are not the same person. Wolfgang Halbig agrees with me. Others who commented on this gave a devastating critique of the differences between them. I'm convinced they're not the same, and I reported that to the court repeatedly, which a judge refused to pursue. So here we have finally my legal defense fund at jamesfetzer.com. None of the money raised will be used to offset the absurd $450,000 verdict, but only to support the appeal that will set that award aside. In the trial, I've been denied to correct the record, expose Sandy Hook, and to the extent possible under these circumstances, restore respect for the First Amendment, freedom of speech, and freedom of the press. If you want to support me, go there now. We are adding the ability to make wire transfers for those who want to make direct bank-to-bank contributions, which I would greatly appreciate and value. Louisa, the whole situation is absolutely stunning. This is a fight of my life for the First Amendment, freedom of speech, and freedom of the press.
Mine too, Jim, and they actually took custody of my kids away to shut me up and make sure that I wouldn't, be motivated to go to the press again and talk about it. They, court ordered that I pay all my ex's legal fees. When they did a custody grab, illegal, unlawful custody grab, to retaliate against me for going to the press initially and, discussing the problems in the civil justice system. So they shut you down. They destroy your life. They bankrupt you financially. They ruin your reputation. They fabricate, as they did in your case, a judgment which is completely propaganda. If you want to know the truth, it's a propaganda judgment. It's only meant to be published so that it discredits you and it defames you, casts you in light.
Yeah, it's a public relations exercise, Louise. You got it exactly right. They know almost certainly they're going to be reversed at the appellate court level, but they've already accomplished their goal. They have use me as an example to punish me by dragging me into court with all the legal fees and inconvenience that entails, and set an example for others. And if they speak out about these outrageous acts by the government, this is what they can expect to have happen to them too.
Exactly. And I am in federal court and I don't have money for an attorney. So, you know, God help me, because this is, I'm fighting up against the deep state, and I've been doing this for 8 years. This wasn't about a divorce. This was about, look, an attorney turns for the king. They work for the British Accreditation Registry. They work for the Queen. They are a collection agency, the court system. It's a collection agency that if the king wants something, he'd send an attorney to go take what belongs to you and bring it to the king. And this is the system that we have. So the attorneys will take whatever you have. So they extorted all of my assets to pay the attorneys. Then in 8 years of litigation, just a damn divorce, for goodness sakes, 8 years of litigation to get justice from this. You can kiss it goodbye. If you don't have deep pockets and you're not well connected, you can kiss your civil liberties goodbye. They don't care. And what's sad, Jim, is that the American people don't know this. They don't know this until they're entrapped within this system themselves. And then they take your dockets and they monetize them. They actually create a financial instrument from it, where they monetize your dockets. They raid your Treasury direct accounts at the U.S. Treasury Department. And this is what the corrupt court system is actually doing. They're corporations. They all have Dun & Bradstreet ratings, and they are there to get as much money and revenue. If they're a corporation, then their revenue is all the people who come in there. And how many times did you get a ticket for somewhere for maybe speeding, and they made you you know, plead to a different charge so that you wouldn't pay points. But then it ends up going on your insurance record, and they say, well, you know, you got this for unsafe driving or whatever, instead of making an illegal left turn or whatever. And, you know, so this is the whole thing. But again, it's the private and the public side, because we're not actual live human beings in the Admiralty law system. So, Jim, the people have been hoodwinked. But look, my friend, thank you very much for your reporting this week. It's always been a pleasure, Jim.
Yep. Thank you, Louisa. And let's hope this 153news.net thing turns out to be a bonanza and a resource for supporting lawsuits like yours and mine and others to stand up for, you know, justice in America, which we're being denied.
Justice is for sale in America. And if you have enough money, you get whatever you want. So, and those are the facts. So, folks, if you want that to change, get up and do something about it, because it's not going to happen by itself. So, Jim, you have a great week. And to all of our viewers, we have other reports coming this week. Stay tuned. We will be doing a special report on this topic this week, coincidentally. So we will be talking about law, about the private and public side, in addition to having that Q&A with Rob Potter later in the week. So please, that's a live super chat on YouTube. So stay tuned for that, folks. It should be interesting. And that's it for now. We sign off. So, you know, thank you for viewing. And this concludes this edition of the GoldFish Report.